The Sky over Schweinfurt, Germany, October 14, 1943, is a canvas of surreal horror. Against the brilliant, cold blue of the stratosphere, hundreds of tiny silver crosses crawl eastward. They are Boeing B-17 flying fortresses of the United States 8th Air Force, an armada of unprecedented scale, pressing deeper into the hostile heart of the Third Reich than ever before without fighter protection. On the ground, the target is vital, the ball-bearing factories that are the literal gears of the German war machine. But in the air, at 25,000 feet, the target is the bombers themselves. For the young men inside these unpressurized, freezing aluminum tubes, the world has shrunk to a terrifyingly small space. It is a space filled with the constant, deafening roar of 4 Wright Cyclone engines, the crackle of the intercom, the sharp, metallic clank of ammunition belts feeding into 50-caliber machine guns, and the frantic, pounding beat of their own hearts. They are suspended between the indifferent heavens and a burning continent. 10-men crews, barely out of their teens, sealed inside a machine whose nickname, Flying Fortress, is about to be tested to its absolute limit. Suddenly, the sky erupts. Like angry hornets, Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs of the Luftwaffe tear into the formations. Cannons flash, and rockets trail plumes of white smoke, weaving a deadly tapestry of destruction. The B-17s, packed into tight defensive combat boxes for mutual protection, unleash a storm of machine gun fire, a hailstorm of lead from every conceivable angle. But the German pilots are skilled, desperate, and defending their homeland. They press their attacks with suicidal ferocity. A fortress to the right explodes in a blossoming orange fireball, its pieces tumbling slowly, lazily, back to earth. No parachutes. Another, its wing sheared off, begins a sickening, flat spin, a silver leaf falling from a dying tree. Inside the remaining planes, the crews can only watch in horror, their knuckles white on their guns, waiting for the inevitable moment when the fighters turn their attention to them. The air is thick with the smell of cordite and fear. This is mission number 115, a day that will be forever seared into the annals of air combat, a day that will be known simply and terrifyingly as Black Thursday. To understand how these young Americans found themselves 5 miles above Germany in the autumn of 1943, one must go back to a pre-war world. A world that dreamed of peace, but prepared for a new, terrifying kind of war. In the 1920s and 30s, a new theory of warfare gained traction, championed by visionaries like Julio Duhay and Billy Mitchell. They argued that the bomber would be the ultimate weapon, an unstoppable force that could leap over trench lines and naval blockades to strike directly at an enemy's industrial heart, shattering their capacity and will to fight. The United States Army Air Corps, enamored with this doctrine, sought a bomber that could fly higher, faster, and farther than any before it. In 1935, the Boeing Aircraft Company unveiled its Model 299. During its debut, a Seattle reporter, awestruck by its bristling array of machine guns, dubbed it a flying fortress. The name stuck. The B-17 was a marvel of its time, a 4-engine heavy bomber designed for strategic, long-range missions. It was built to be tough, with a legendary ability to absorb astonishing amounts of damage and still bring its crew home. But its most crucial feature, and the one upon which American air strategy was staked, was its heavy defensive armament. The prevailing theory in the Air Corps was that tightly packed formations of these bombers, with their overlapping fields of fire from up to 13 50-caliber machine guns, could defend themselves against enemy fighters without the need for escorts. This was the gamble, the core belief that would send thousands of men into the skies over Europe. As war clouds gathered, this theory remained largely untested. Britain's Royal Air Force, after suffering horrific losses in early daylight raids, had switched almost exclusively to nighttime area bombing. But the American commanders, led by figures like General Ira Eaker, were adamant. They believed in the moral and strategic superiority of daylight precision bombing. Using the highly secret Norden bomb site, an analog computer of remarkable complexity, they aimed to destroy specific military and industrial targets, crippling Germany's war machine with surgical accuracy. It was a bold, quintessentially American strategy, technological, precise, and, it was hoped, decisive. When America was thrust into the war, this doctrine became the central pillar of the newly formed 8th Air Force, which began arriving in England in the spring of 1942. From muddy airfields carved out of the English countryside, they would launch a new kind of offensive, a round-the-clock assault in conjunction with the RAF's night raids, designed to bring the Third Reich to its knees. The first American B-17 raid took place on August 17, 1942. A small force of 12 bombers, with General Eaker himself on board the lead plane, struck the railway yards at Rouen-Sotteville in France. The mission was a success. All aircraft returned safely, and the concept of daylight precision bombing seemed validated. But Rouen was a short-range mission, well within the protective umbrella of RAF Spitfire escorts. The real test would come when the fortresses had to fly deep into Germany, beyond the range of any friendly fighter. Life for the 10-man crews of the B-17s was a strange mixture of pastoral English life and the brutal reality of high-altitude warfare. They were a self-contained family in the sky. A pilot and co-pilot, a navigator and bombardier in the nose, a flight engineer manning the top turret, a radio operator, a ball turret gunner curled up in his Sperry ball, 2 waist gunners, and a tail gunner, the loneliest position on the plane. Each man was a specialist, but in the heat of combat, they were all gunners, their lives depending on their collective ability to fend off attackers. The pre-mission rituals became a superstition-laden routine. Awakened in the pre-dawn cold, they would attend briefings where a curtain would be pulled back to reveal the target for the day, a red line of yarn stretching across a massive map of Europe. Groans would fill the room when the line stretched deep into Germany, into Fighter Alley. Then it was gearing up, layers of clothing, heavy fleece-lined jackets and trousers, and electronically heated suits to ward off the paralyzing cold at 25,000 feet, where temperatures could plunge to 50 degrees below zero. Once aboard, they were encased in a vibrating, roaring world of aluminum and plexiglass. For 8 to 10 hours, they would endure crippling cold, the constant need for oxygen, and the ever-present threat of sudden, violent death. And between missions, they waited. They waited for their name to be posted on the bulletin board for the next day's flight list, a list that determined who would live and who might die. In 1943, the 8th Air Force began to ramp up its offensive, pushing its bomber streams deeper and deeper into enemy territory. The targets were the pillars of German industry, submarine pens on the French coast, aircraft factories, and transportation hubs. And with every mile the B-17s flew beyond the range of their escorts, the price went up. The Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, was a formidable and experienced foe. Their pilots, flying nimble and heavily armed Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s, learned to exploit the B-17's few weaknesses. They discovered that the bomber's defensive firepower was weakest from the front. German pilots developed a terrifying tactic: the head-on attack. They would fly directly at the bomber formations, cannons blazing, at a closing speed of over 500 miles per hour, giving the American gunners mere seconds to react. It was a nerve-shattering experience for both sides. The sky became a three-dimensional chessboard of attack and defense. The Americans perfected the combat box formation, a staggered arrangement of squadrons and groups designed to provide maximum interlocking defensive fire. But the Germans countered with new weapons and tactics, employing air-to-air rockets and concentrating their attacks on the lead and lowermost elements of the formations, hoping to break their cohesion. The bombers were also confronted by another deadly enemy, Flak. German anti-aircraft artillery filled the sky around the targets with a thick, ugly blanket of black and gray explosions. Each puff of smoke contained hundreds of jagged metal shards that could rip through a B-17's thin aluminum skin, sever control cables, ignite fuel tanks, and kill or maim the men inside. There was no way to dodge it. The bombers had to fly straight and level through the barrage on their final run to the target, a testament to the iron discipline of the pilots and the unwavering focus of the bombardiers hunched over their Norden bomb sites. During this period, the legend of the B-17's toughness grew. Stories and photographs of fortresses returning to base with tails shredded, noses shattered, and engines on fire became commonplace. They were a testament to the plane's incredible resilience. But for every one that made it back, others did not. The odds were grim. A crewman's tour of duty was set at 25 missions. With loss rates sometimes exceeding 8% per mission, the statistical chances of completing a full tour were terrifyingly low. Yet they flew. They flew for each other, for the men in their crew, for the abstract idea of freedom, and for the simple, desperate hope of completing their tour and going home. The story of the B-17 Memphis Belle captured the public imagination. In May 1943, it became one of the first B-17s to complete its 25-mission tour, with its entire crew alive and uninjured. The plane and its crew were sent back to the United States for a war bond tour, their survival a symbol of hope against overwhelming odds. The story of the B-17 Memphis Belle captured the public imagination. In May 1943, it became one of the first B-17s to complete its 25-mission tour, with its entire crew alive and uninjured. The plane and its crew were sent back to the United States for a war bond tour, their survival a symbol of hope against overwhelming odds. The summer and fall of 1943 marked the crucible for the 8th Air Force and its daylight bombing strategy. The High Command decided to target a critical bottleneck in the German war economy: ball bearing production. A huge percentage of Germany's ball bearings were produced in the city of Schweinfurt. The theory was simple: destroy these factories, and the entire German war machine, from tanks to aircraft, would grind to a halt. On August 17, 1943, the 8th launched its most ambitious mission to date, a double strike against the Messerschmitt aircraft factory in Regensburg and the ball-bearing plants at Schweinfurt. The plan was for two large bomber forces to attack in quick succession, splitting the German fighter defenses. The Regensburg force would then fly on to newly captured bases in North Africa, a pioneering shuttle mission. But the plan went awry. Fog over England delayed the takeoff of the Schweinfurt force. The Regensburg group flew on alone and took a savage beating from the undivided strength of the Luftwaffe. They inflicted heavy damage on the factory, but at a terrible cost. By the time the Schweinfurt force arrived over Germany, the Luftwaffe fighters had landed, refueled, rearmed, and risen again to meet them. The ensuing air battle was ferocious. In total, the mission cost the 8th Air Force 60 B-17s, a staggering loss of over 600 highly trained airmen. Despite the heavy losses, the High Command remained convinced that the ball-bearing plants were a vital target. They believed one more decisive blow could cripple the industry, and so they planned a second raid. This brings us back to October 14, 1943, Black Thursday. 291 B-17s were dispatched to Schweinfurt, once again unescorted for the majority of the journey. The Luftwaffe was waiting. For hours, hundreds of German fighters savaged the bomber stream in a running battle that stretched for hundreds of miles. The American gunners, firing until their barrels glowed red, claimed dozens of enemy fighters, but the attacks were relentless. The combat boxes, designed for mutual protection, were torn apart as damaged bombers fell out of formation to be pounced upon by swarms of fighters. One by one, the fortresses fell from the sky. The final tally was a catastrophe. 60 B-17s were shot down over Germany. 17 more were so badly damaged they either crashed on landing or had to be scrapped. In a single day, the 8th Air Force lost 77 bombers and nearly 650 crewmen. Black Thursday was a devastating defeat. It proved beyond any doubt that the theory of the self-defending bomber was a myth. The losses were unsustainable. The daylight precision bombing campaign against strategic targets deep within Germany was temporarily halted. The strategy that had been the bedrock of the American air war had failed, written in the blood and fire of the skies over Schweinfurt. The fortresses had reached their limit. In the grim aftermath of the Schweinfurt disaster, a profound sense of crisis gripped the American High Command. The daylight bombing campaign, the cornerstone of their strategy, was on the ropes. The B-17, for all its heroism and durability, could not survive alone in the hostile skies of the Reich. The answer, it was clear, lay in providing fighter escorts that could accompany the bombers all the way to the target and back. The problem was range. Existing fighters, like the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt and the Lockheed P-38 Lightning, simply did not have the fuel capacity to make the deep penetrations necessary. The solution came in the form of a sleek, elegant fighter plane that would change the course of the air war, the North American P-51 Mustang. Initially designed for the British, the P-51 was a good but not great aircraft. However, when British engineers fitted it with the superb Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the same power plant used in the Spitfire, the Mustang was transformed into a legend. With the addition of external drop tanks, the P-51 had the range to fly to Berlin and back. More importantly, it had the speed and maneuverability to meet and defeat the best fighters the Luftwaffe had to offer. The arrival of the P-51 in significant numbers in the winter of 1943-44 marked the crucial turning point in the air war over Europe. In early 1944, a new commander, General Jimmy Doolittle, took charge of the 8th Air Force. He immediately changed the rules of engagement for the escort fighters. No longer were they to be tied closely to the bomber formations. His new directive was simple and aggressive. Your first duty is to destroy German fighters. This unleashed the Mustangs. They began to sweep ahead of the bomber streams, actively hunting the Luftwaffe, engaging them over their own airfields and forcing them into a war of attrition they could not win. The climax of this new strategy came in February 1944, during a series of coordinated raids known as Operation Argument, or, more popularly, Big Week. For 6 consecutive days, massive fleets of American bombers, now heavily escorted by P-51s and P-47s, struck at the heart of the German aircraft industry. The Luftwaffe rose to defend their factories, and the skies over Germany became the scene of some of the largest and most ferocious air battles in history. The losses on both sides were heavy, but for the Luftwaffe, they were catastrophic. They lost hundreds of aircraft and, more critically, hundreds of their most experienced and irreplaceable fighter pilots. The back of the Luftwaffe's fighter arm was broken. The Little Friends, as the bomber crews called their escorts, had cleared the skies. From that point on, while missions were still perilous, the overwhelming threat of enemy fighters began to diminish. The B-17s could now roam over Germany with a degree of freedom that would have been unimaginable just months before. The tide had turned. With the Luftwaffe largely neutralized, the B-17s of the mighty 8th, along with the bombers of the 15th Air Force based in Italy, unleashed the full fury of the strategic bombing campaign. The target list expanded to include the synthetic oil production facilities that fueled the German war machine and the vast network of railways that supplied its armies. In the run-up to the D-Day landings in June 1944, the fortresses played a crucial role, systematically destroying bridges, marshalling yards, and coastal defenses in France, isolating the Normandy battlefield and paving the way for the Allied invasion. As Allied armies advanced across Europe, the B-17s continued their relentless assault. They bombed targets in support of ground troops and continued to pound the remnants of German industry. The scale of the raids grew ever larger, with armadas of over 1,000 bombers becoming a common sight. The once clear skies over the Third Reich were now filled with the contrails of the flying fortresses, a constant, visible symbol of impending doom. Yet, even in this period of overwhelming Allied air superiority, the human cost remained high. Flak was still a deadly threat, and mechanical failure or simple bad luck could bring down a bomber as surely as a fighter's cannon. And amidst the grand strategy and the staggering statistics of bomb tonnage, individual stories of courage, loss, and even unexpected humanity continued to play out. One of the most remarkable incidents of the air war occurred on December 20th, 1943. A B-17 named Ye Old Pub, piloted by 2nd Lieutenant Charlie Brown, was returning from a raid on Bremen. The bomber was horrifically damaged, with one crewman dead, several others wounded, its oxygen, hydraulic, and electrical systems shot out and barely under control. Alone and vulnerable, it was intercepted by a German Bf-109 flown by Luftwaffe ace Franz Stigler. Stigler, who needed just one more victory to earn the coveted Knight's Cross, closed in for the kill. But as he drew alongside the shattered fortress, he could see the wounded and terrified crew inside. He saw the tail gunner slumped over his guns, dead. An old commander had once told him, "You fight by the rules of war for you, not for your enemy. You fight with chivalry." Recalling these words, Stigler made an astonishing decision. He did not fire. Instead, he flew alongside the crippled bomber, escorting it and protecting it from German anti-aircraft batteries on the coast. He guided it out over the North Sea, gave a salute to the bewildered American pilot, and turned back. Charlie Brown managed to fly his battered plane back to England and land safely. For decades, he searched for the German pilot who had spared his life. In 1990, they finally found each other and became the closest of friends until their deaths. It was a singular moment of compassion in the midst of a brutal, unforgiving war, a reminder of the shared humanity that can sometimes transcend even the deepest of conflicts. By the spring of 1945, Germany was a ruin. The strategic bombing campaign had achieved its ultimate goal. Over 1.5 million tons of bombs had been dropped on the Reich by Allied aircraft, and of that, over 640,000 tons were delivered by the B-17s of the USAF. The country's cities were rubble, its transportation system was shattered, and its industries were crippled. The B-17, the iconic symbol of American air power, had played a pivotal role in this victory. Of the 12,731 flying fortresses built, nearly 5,000 were lost in combat. The human cost was even more staggering. The 8th Air Force alone suffered over 26,000 combat deaths, more than the entire United States Marine Corps in World War II. The legacy of the B-17 and the men who flew it is complex. They were pioneers of a new form of warfare, young men who fought a lonely and terrifying battle 5 miles above the earth. They displayed unimaginable courage in the face of overwhelming odds, and their sacrifice was instrumental in breaking the back of the Nazi war machine. The debate over the effectiveness and morality of the strategic bombing campaign continues to this day. The Norden bomb site, once touted as being able to drop a bomb in a pickle barrel, proved far less accurate under combat conditions. In reality, many bombs fell wide of their intended military targets, causing immense destruction and civilian casualties. Yet it is undeniable that the relentless pressure of the air war degraded Germany's ability to fight, diverted huge resources to air defense, and ultimately hastened the end of the conflict. The flying fortress itself became a legend. It was more than just a machine of war. It was a symbol of American industrial might, a testament to its own rugged durability, and a home to the 10-man crews who placed their faith in its wings. After the war, most of the surviving B-17s were unceremoniously scrapped, their duty done. But a precious few were saved, preserved in museums, or lovingly restored by volunteers to fly again, their thundering engines a living tribute to a generation that saved the world. They are a reminder of a time when ordinary young men were called upon to do extraordinary things, to climb into the cold, thin air and fly into the very heart of hell, armed with little more than courage, camaraderie, and an unwavering belief in the cause for which they fought. The story of the B-17 Flying Fortress is a powerful chapter in the history of human conflict. It is a story of technological innovation, strategic gambles, and immense sacrifice. It reminds us of the terrible costs of war, but also of the incredible resilience of the human spirit. The experiences of these crews, the fear they faced, and the courage they showed should never be forgotten. If you've been moved by this story, take a moment to learn more. Visit a local aviation museum, read the personal accounts of the veterans, and support organizations dedicated to preserving these historic aircraft and the men who flew them. After the war, most of the surviving B-17s were unceremoniously scrapped, their duty done. But a precious few were saved, preserved in museums, or lovingly restored by volunteers to fly again, their thundering engines a living tribute to a generation that saved the world. They are a reminder of a time when ordinary young men were called upon to do extraordinary things, to climb into the cold, thin air and fly into the very heart of hell, armed with little more than courage, camaraderie, and an unwavering belief in the cause for which they fought. The story of the B-17 Flying Fortress is a powerful chapter in the history of human conflict. It is a story of technological innovation, strategic gambles, and immense sacrifice. It reminds us of the terrible costs of war, but also of the incredible resilience of the human spirit. The experiences of these crews, the fear they faced, and the courage they showed should never be forgotten. If you've been moved by this story, take a moment to learn more. Visit a local aviation museum, read the personal accounts of the veterans, and support organizations dedicated to preserving these historic aircraft and the men who flew them. By engaging with this history, we honor their legacy and ensure that their sacrifices were not in vain. Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below, and let us continue the conversation about this pivotal moment in our shared past. As the last B-17s returned from their final missions over a vanquished Germany, they left behind a continent in ruins and a world forever changed. The concept of total war, once a theoretical nightmare, had become a terrifying reality, delivered from the bomb bay doors of aircraft like the Flying Fortress. These bombers were designed as weapons of precise industrial warfare, but they became instruments of widespread destruction. The young men who flew them were not conquerors in the traditional sense. They were technicians of a new kind of combat, waging war from a detached, almost clinical altitude. Yet their experience was anything but detached. It was intimate and brutal, a daily confrontation with death in the freezing, lonely expanse of the stratosphere. The B-17 did not win the war alone, but the war could not have been won without it. It was a flawed weapon, born of a flawed strategy, that in the end proved indispensable. The ultimate legacy of the Flying Fortress is not just in the targets it destroyed or the battles it won. It lies in the quiet courage of the 10 men who formed a family inside its aluminum skin, in the hum of its 4 powerful engines that became the sound of liberation for millions, and in the enduring question it forces us to ask: what is the true price of victory? And how do we measure the valor of those who are asked to pay it?